What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend, we got UFC going to Atlanta for a fight night headlined by Joaquin, Buckley, and Kamaru Usman. We went 10 for 13 on picks at UFC 316, so let's keep the hot streak going, and without further ado, let's jump right into the picks and predictions for this weekend. Kicking off the card, we got Vanessa Demopoulos versus Jamey-Lyn Horth. This is a low-level women's MMA fight to kick off this card, and you know how we feel about these. We tend to stay away on the betting side. Jamey-Lyn Horth is also, a pretty sizable favorite in this matchup, so definitely going to stay away unless there's a prop later on in the week that I really like for some reason. But Horth is going to be the pick to win this matchup. I think that, Vanessa Demopoulos coming in on short notice, coming up a weight class where, I really don't think letterman skill really applies in this context. She's also 2-3 in her last 5, with both those wins being really close decisions that I kind of thought she lost, both those fights. So in my eyes, Demopoulos should be 0-5 in her last 5. The one thing Demopoulos does well that she did in those 2 decision wins specifically is that, she throws more volume than her opponent, and a lot of it is empty volume, empty strikes, shit that's not doing anything to her opponent, but, it makes her look like she is winning close striking rounds. Jamey-Lyn Horth on the other side, she's going to be bigger. I think that, she can wrestle here. We saw Demopoulos in her last matchup just get absolutely dominated by Talita Allen-Carr with the wrestling. She got taken down, could do nothing with it. And I think that Jamey-Lyn Horth can come in here and do something similar. She can, push Demopoulos up against the fence, just be real physical with her. The only way Horth loses this fight is if she tries to make it, look pretty and does just a little bit of low volume work in space, and Demopoulos just throwing random punches and just missing, but she's just throwing more, so they kind of give her the decision. I don't really see another way for Demopoulos to win unless Horth really just throws this one away. Everything kind of points to Jamey-Lyn Horth's side. She's going to be the pick. Still really hard to trust fighters at this level, even though, based off this breakdown, you'll see that it's really hard for Demopoulos to kind of pull this one off. So I'm going to go with Jamey-Lyn Horth. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Phil Rowe versus Ange Loosa, and I think this is probably the hardest fight on this card to call, in my opinion. I think that this fight can go a couple ways. We got Phil Rowe 10-5, Ange Loosa 10-4. Both these guys are very inconsistent. Phil Rowe also on a bit of a layoff, not too active. Hasn't fought in the UFC since June of 2024. He's now coming back to fight Ange Loosa, and Ange Loosa also coming off of a loss, and that loss is to Gabriel Bonfim, where he made Bonfim go all 3 rounds, and that is pretty good. We know Ange Loosa is super tough, super durable. It's he's never been finished. It's gonna be really hard to finish someone like an Ange Loosa. But yeah, let's break these guys down. I think that you're gonna see Phil Rowe coming in here, 80-inch reach, Ange Loosa with the 74-inch reach, so sizable reach advantage for Phil Rowe. Phil Rowe also has, pretty striking, pretty footwork. He's going to be tall and big in there. And you can also see that out of all 10 wins that Phil Rowe has, they're all coming by finish, which is something to note in this breakdown. I think that this fight does go the distance. I see that Ange Loosa, he's super durable. We've seen it in the Gabriel Bonfim fight, super tough. I just think that he's going to be a little bit outclassed on the feet here by Phil Rowe. And even though Phil Rowe is going to land big, I think he's going to hurt Loosa. I don't think Phil Rowe is going to be the one to just, kind of put Loosa away for the first time. Phil Rowe does have power. Like I said, I do see him landing big. I do see him hurting Loosa. But I think Loosa is going to make Phil Rowe go all 3 rounds. Now, it's interesting because, like I said before, Phil Rowe has no decision wins. There's a first time for everything, so it's kind of weird picking a fighter with no decision wins to win by decision. But that is really realistically what I see happening here. On the Ange Loosa side, I think that his best bet is to kind of wrestle Phil Rowe, but the one thing is that we've seen Ange Loosa just kind of fade as the fight goes on. So I think that even if Ange Loosa comes out here and does well, maybe in the first round, getting Rowe to the ground, doing some work to Phil Rowe on the ground, I think as the second round progresses and as you see the fight progress into the second half, you're going to see Ange Loosa fade a bit, and that's where Phil Rowe can kind of take over and, shift the momentum to his side. So in that scenario, I still see Phil Rowe kind of squeaking out the decision. In the scenario that Loosa, doesn't come out here and wrestle, or in the scenario where he can't because, Rowe has kind of tightened things up on the takedown defense side, I also see kind of Rowe winning there. So I'm going to lean slightly towards the underdog here. Like I said, I think this is one of the harder fights, if not the hardest fight on the card to predict. But I do see Phil Rowe getting this one done, probably by decision. His first decision win, and let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Ricky Simon versus Cameron Smotherman, and I'm all over Ricky Simon in this matchup. The odds for this matchup dropped earlier today, where Ricky Simon opened as a minus 265 favorite. He's now ballooned to a minus 500, and I think it makes a ton of sense. Ricky Simon, a ton of UFC experience, fought some really great fighters. And Cameron Smotherman, he's 1-1 in the UFC, coming into this fight on short notice. That being said, he did make his UFC debut on short notice as well against Jake Hadley and looked really good in that fight. Schooled Jake Hadley, who's now no longer in the promotion. But Cameron Smotherman then fights Sergey Sidi. Looks not good at all against Sergey Sidi. Sidi takes him down a couple times, controls him, pretty close on the feet. And against Ricky Simon, man, we know Ricky Simon, he's a great wrestler. He has, 3 losses in a row, and that kind of lowered Ricky Simon's stock quite a bit. But those 3 losses realistically have aged beautifully for Ricky Simon. His first loss in that streak was Song Yadong. We know Song Yadong coming off that win on Henry Cejudo. Prior to that, had a pretty competitive fight with Peter Yan. So we know kind of the level of Song Yadong. After that, he lost to Mario Bautista. Bautista's on a tear right now. The Jose Aldo fight is what it is, but outside of that, Bautista is on a tear. And then after that, he loses to Vinicius Oliveira, who's also on a tear. After beating him, Vinicius Oliveira beats Said Nurmagomedov, who was a pretty good prospect as well. I mean, the guy's last name is Nurmagomedov, so you can kind of assume from there. And then you see Ricky Simon going up against Javid Basharat, where I thought he was going to lose again. Javid Basharat, very technical, very defensive, and very safe on the feet. And I just didn't see Ricky Simon taking Javid Basharat down, which, he couldn't in that fight. But somehow he was able to land that big overhand and just put Basharat out completely. Pretty Josh Emmett-esque performance in that fight against Basharat. And we know Ricky Simon does have power. He is one of those guys, good wrestling, really strong base, and then just throw real hard shots. And against a Cameron Smotherman, I think that's going to be way too much. Cameron Smotherman, cool boxer, does have some decent forward pressure, but we saw in his last fight that, Sergey Sidi was being able to take him down. I think Ricky Simon can definitely take a Cameron Smotherman down to the ground and kind of beat him up there. And B, Ricky Simon is going to land big on Cameron Smotherman. We'll see how he fares when he does that. He does have 2 KO losses in his pro record, so that's something to note. He also did get knocked out by Charalampos Gregorio in the Contender Series back in 2023. So he can be knocked out. I think Simon can put him away here. I also think he can wrestle, so I'm all over Simon. He is minus 500 now, so that is something to look out for. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Cody Durden versus Jose Ochoa, and I'm going to have to pick Jose Ochoa here. Initially, when I looked at this matchup, I thought that, Cody Durden as an underdog, great underdog to kind of bet on, great underdog to pick for this fight. He's got the UFC experience. Jose Ochoa 0-1 in the UFC, losing his UFC debut, but he did lose it to Loner Kavanagh, and, that fight was pretty interesting. Jose Ochoa kept up with Kavanagh, made Kavanagh work, and Kavanagh's a real good prospect in the division, so that's something to note. Jose Ochoa, while he did lose, he can fight up to that level. Cody Durden, I think that he's coming off that loss to Joshua Van, and Cody Durden on the feet, he's got decent hands, he's got decent power, but I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with Jose Ochoa on the feet specifically. I think that Cody Durden is definitely going to have to take this fight to the ground. And I think as a pure, submission threat, I think Ochoa might also be better than Durden in this fight. So that is also something to note. So I think Durden really is going to have to wrestle and control Ochoa for 2 out of the 3 rounds. And we kind of saw how he tried to do that to Joshua Van and how that didn't work. Joshua Van defended some takedowns against Cody Durden and then just kind of went off on him. The second Durden could not get this fight to the ground. Jose Ochoa, I think, is going to be, pretty similar. I think that his takedown defense might not be as good as Van's. I think that Durden might actually get Ochoa to the ground at some point, but Ochoa is going to be ultra aggressive. I don't trust Durden's gas tank. If Durden did have the gas tank to do this, I kind of would be all over him, but I think the first round probably go to Durden here. He's going to take Ochoa down. He might control him a bit, but I think Ochoa is going to be ultra aggressive, especially if he comes out in that second round down 1 round. He's going to stop the takedowns as Durden, gets a little bit tired, as, they're not as dry as they were in the first round. And I think that Durden's going to try to force a bunch of grappling exchanges. And I see Ochoa kind of jumping on a sub here. He's super dangerous. He is a finisher, 7-1. 6 of those wins by knockout. 1 of those wins by submission. And I think that, he's coming out that Shootbox Diego Lima gym. We know how those guys are. We know they've got great jiu-jitsu, great Muay Thai. I see Jose Ochoa kind of jumping on Durden's neck at some point in some grappling exchange. Maybe it's by guillotine. Maybe he gets the back, gets a rear naked choke. But I think he finds a submission here. I haven't played this fight. I think it's pretty dangerous to play Ochoa at minus 180. I'm probably going to stay away from that on the money line side. But I think as a prop, plus 600, Ochoa to find a sub, maybe something I might look at later on in the week. So that's going to be my pick. I'm going to go with the Ochoa side. I think he does find the finish. And yeah, let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Malcolm Wellmaker versus Khris Moutinho. You probably heard a little bit about Khris Moutinho as of late. He was one of Sean O'Malley's former opponents. He got absolutely destroyed by Sean O'Malley. Then one fight later, he gets cut from the UFC, but since then, he's been on a little bit of a tear in some regional promotions. Now he's coming back into the UFC, but he's got a tall test ahead of him. He's got Malcolm Wellmaker, 9-0, undefeated. Earlier this year, Wellmaker made his UFC debut against Cameron Simon, knocked out Simon in the first round, and Simon's still a pretty good prospect in the UFC. So Wellmaker looking really sharp. I don't think Khris Moutinho is going to have anything for him in this fight. I think that Wellmaker is going to find a knockout here. He's minus 1,300, so there's not much more to say on this matchup. Let's move on to the next fight. Up next, we got Michael Chiesa versus Court McGee, and I'm going to go with Michael Chiesa here. I once again want to keep this one pretty short. Michael Chiesa is minus 300. I don't think this fight is worth betting on whatsoever. Chiesa's 37 years old. Court McGee is 40 years old, so both these guys are pretty old. Chiesa a little bit younger. Chiesa's coming off a 2-fight win streak to Max Griffin and Tony Ferguson. And Court McGee in his last fight, pretty good performance against Tim Means, got the submission in that fight. But Michael Chiesa should be able to take Court McGee down here. Court McGee at 40 years old, 22-13, never been submitted. So that's something interesting. I know a lot of people are here picking Michael Chiesa by submission, but I don't know if Michael Chiesa is going to be the one to submit Court McGee. I think the only way he submits Court McGee in this fight is if that, McGee's like, fuck it, I'm 40. It's round 3. I'm losing this fight. I'm probably not going to get a finish on Michael Chiesa. So fuck it. I'm just going to be done with the night and, get submitted. But I think that if Court McGee wants to stay safe from Chiesa's submissions, he can in this fight. And, outside of that, I think that Chiesa probably gets this one done by decision. I think that he can take him down. A lot of this fight will probably happen on the ground. And yeah, let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Paul Craig versus Rodolfo Bellato. This fight has been rebooked. It was canceled a little bit earlier on because Bellato had a very interesting, medical issue that he had to deal with. So it got canceled. Now he's rebooked to fight Paul Craig once again. And Paul Craig, man, I like Paul Craig. I hope, I was really wishing that he beat Bo Nickel in his last fight, but he's not really beating Bellato here. I think that Bellato, he's come in to MMA with the grappling base. So, Paul Craig, while he does have great submissions, he does have a great guard. We know who Paul Craig is. I don't think it's going to be easy to just kind of handle Rodolfo Bellato on the ground here. Paul Craig also doesn't have the takedowns to really get fights to the ground. So I think that Bellato is going to keep this fight standing. And while, Paul Craig likes being tall, likes being rangy, uses kicks decently well, I think that Bellato is just going to kind of walk in, just eat a shot here and there, but just kind of walk forward and just come through and kind of knock Paul Craig out. Bellato throws big. He's got a pretty strong chin. He's one of those guys with a really square head. I think he's going to walk forward, eat shots, and then throw a big one. And eventually, Paul Craig's going to go down to one of those big shots. So I'm going to go Rodolfo Bellato by knockout. I don't really see this fight playing out any other way. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Alonzo Menifield versus Oumar Sy. And I'm going to go with Oumar Sy here. He's a massive favorite. Lots of big favorites on this card as well. And, Alonzo Menifield, I had him in his last fight, bet on him to beat Julius Walker. And that was a close split decision win for Alonzo Menifield. That fight was super sloppy. They were absolutely done. Their gas tanks were fully drained. Oumar Sy, one thing about Oumar Sy is he's 11-0. Prior to his last match against Da Woon Jung, he was, straight first round finish type of guy. We saw Da Woon Jung kind of push him all 3 rounds. He went the decision, 30-27 him. So I do like to see that. Someone that doesn't get out of there early is kind of still game, and he's coming through there, still fighting round 2, late round 3, still fighting against Da Woon Jung. So I do like that for Oumar Sy. I think Oumar Sy is going to come out here. I think he's going to grapple Alonzo Menifield. I think he kind of gets this one done by ground and pound. I see him taking Menifield down and just kind of putting in a ton of work there. I think ground and pound is probably going to be the way for Oumar Sy. 83-inch reach to Alonzo Menifield, 76. Menifield's a big puncher, though, so you're always going to probably have a puncher's chance against someone like Alonzo Menifield. But, Oumar Sy should be the better fighter. Didn't like Menifield's gas tank in his last fight either. So I'm going to decide to win this one. Pretty wide line. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Cody Brundage versus Mansur Abdul-Malik. And, I might be going out on a limb here, but I'm going to go with Cody Brundage to beat Mansur Abdul-Malik. I think that, Mansur Abdul-Malik at the minus 800 price tag, it's just really hurting me to pick him. And I just think he's one of those fighters that is on like fraud check watch in my head. His last win against Nick Klein, Nick Klein almost had him out of there in the first round. And then he does come back. He rallies back into that fight and then knocks Nick Klein out in the second round. So there is some positives from that fight for sure. But Cody Brundage, man, I think if Cody Brundage has, you in the same situation that Nick Klein did, he's getting you out of there. He's got some real power. He brings some real danger to this fight. And I just think that, Mansur Abdul-Malik, he does his best work on the ground, but I don't think he'll just take Cody Brundage down, throw him to the ground. He definitely hasn't shown like the takedown ability like that. And I just think that Cody Brundage, if he doesn't want to engage in wrestling here, he could keep this fight standing. Now, standing up, Abdul-Malik's going to throw some pretty long looping shots, but I think Brundage is quicker. I think he's cleaner. He doesn't have the reach advantage, so that's something to note on the feet. But I just think that if Mansur Abdul-Malik doesn't get this fight to the ground, it's going to look real interesting. I mean, he could knock Cody Brundage out for sure, but I also think Cody Brundage, man, the way we saw Mansur Abdul-Malik get hurt in that Nick Klein fight, I think Cody Brundage could do the same to him. So at like minus 800 for Mansur Abdul-Malik, I know like it's kind of like the Kill and Sell Killed one from last week where Sell Killed realistically was going to win, but I just didn't like Sell Killed at the odds, so I was like, fuck it, go with Yanal Ashmus. I'm not going to be betting this fight, so it's going to be interesting. Well, I'm not going to be betting on Mansur in this fight for sure. Even if I did pick him, I was going to bet him at minus 800, but I think there is some value on the Cody Brundage side. I think that he could catch Mansur. I don't think Mansur is like, this like crazy grappler that's going to take Cody Brundage down at will. I see Mansur, but I don't see his takedowns being that good. If the fight does end up on the ground, though, he's going to be all over Brundage for sure. But I think Brundage can stay safe, stay standing, and if he's standing, I think he can land a quick big one on Mansur Abdul-Malik, and we'll see where it goes from there. So I'm gonna go with Brundage slightly. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Cody Garbrandt versus Raoni Barcelos, and I'm going to go with another underdog here. I'm going to go with Cody Garbrandt to beat Raoni Barcelos. I think that, Cody Garbrandt is coming off that loss to Davison Figueiredo where, he was taken down. He was submitted. Figueiredo got that rear naked choke on him. That was at UFC 300, I'm pretty sure. And then Raoni Barcelos coming off that win to Peyton Talbot where, he absolutely fraud checked Peyton Talbot. Peyton Talbot was, I think, like over a minus 1,000 favorite going into that fight. And Raoni Barcelos at plus 700 comes out there, just dominates Peyton Talbot on the ground, takes him down over and over again. Talbot had nothing for him. And I just don't think that Garbrandt is like that green because Garbrandt obviously has seen the best of the division. He was former champion. He's fought the who's who. And, Raoni Barcelos has lost to people like Victor Henry, Kyler Phillips, who has not looked good as of late whatsoever. I just think that he has to get this fight to the ground against Cody Garbrandt, and Cody Garbrandt's going to know that. I don't think Raoni Barcelos is this like insane wrestler that can do that to anyone at will. So I just think that Garbrandt's going to kind of know that on the feet he's going to be much quicker, much slicker. He does pack a punch too, so we'll see what happens. I think that at plus money odds, with all the experience, with how good that like Cody Garbrandt has looked at his peak, I think he can definitely turn back the clock, look that good, and keep this fight standing. Piece up Raoni Barcelos on the feet. A lot of movement. It's going to be necessary. It's going to be interesting over 3 rounds. We'll see what happens. But, I'm going to go with Garbrandt here. I think he has what it takes. He's plus money here. He's an underdog. He's the better Cody on the card, in my opinion. So I'm going to go with Garbrandt. Let's see what happens. And let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, I'm picking another underdog. I'm taking Andre Petroski to beat Edmen Shahbazyan. And, Andre Petroski on a 3-fight win streak coming to this fight. Edmen Shahbazyan, going back and forth, jumping from wins and losses in his last 5 matchups. He's coming off a win to Dylan Budka, knocked him out nice and early in that fight. And, Dylan Budka, since he got into the UFC, has been real trash. He has some decent performances prior to the UFC, like a pretty good fight against Azamat Bekoyev, who's looked great in the UFC. But outside of that, Budka in the UFC looks trash. Prior to that, Shahbazyan was beating Gerald Meerschaert in a fight until he sold, and Meerschaert came in with that quick sub. So, with Shahbazyan, we know what he is. He's a good striker, definitely really green early on in the fight. But as the fight extends, he kind of lets momentum shift. And Andre Petroski, man, I think, 1, he's very physically strong. 2, I just think that he's going to get this one done just by taking Shahbazyan down. Shahbazyan can be taken down. I think Petroski has the wrestling to take him down. And once this fight gets on the ground, Petroski has great control, can definitely hold Shahbazyan down. Maybe he finds a sub, but, I think that Petroski can grind out a decision here. He's the better decision fighter out of the 2. He has more paths to victory out of the 2. I think that the longer the fight goes on, the more it favors Petroski. So Edmen Shahbazyan, minus 200, whatever he is right now, minus 180. And, having like kind of the path of like an early knockout, and that's about it. Being there for him, I don't like that. Give me the underdog in Andre Petroski. One thing I do note is that Petroski is, finishable. He can be knocked out early, so that path to victory is really there for Shahbazyan. But come on, Shahbazyan being 2-1, where I think outside of an early knockout, this fight starts trending in the Petrosky direction. I'm going to have to go with Petrosky. There's just more, probability that he kind of gets this one done. So give me Petrosky, give me the momentum. I like him to get it done. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got the co-main event. We got Rose Namajunas versus Miranda Maverick. Give me Rose Namajunas to beat Miranda Maverick by decision this weekend. I think that, Rose Namajunas in space, she's going to be slick. She's definitely the better striker. She can piece up Miranda Maverick, especially in space with her footwork. Maverick's really going to have to bully and clinch Rose a lot, do a lot of chain wrestling stuff against Rose, but I don't think Maverick brings anything to the table that Rose Namajunas has not seen before. I think Namajunas has, pretty good wrestling herself. She can definitely offensively wrestle in this fight too if she wants to, but I think she stays in space here. I think she stays, in striking range, pieces up a Miranda Maverick, and, if Maverick starts clinching a lot, then hopefully Rose is smart enough to kind of break off as soon as possible. So I'm going with Rose Namajunas that she's got the tools to get this one done. I think it goes all 3 rounds, obviously. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got the main event, and all signs in this are pointing towards Joaquin Buckley. We got Joaquin Buckley versus Kamaru Usman in a 5-round main event. And Usman, 3-fight skid, 2 losses to Leon Edwards, then a loss to Khamzat Chimaev, which was almost 2 years ago. So his last fight against Chimaev 2 years ago. And obviously, that fight Usman did take on short notice, up a weight class to go fight Khamzat Chimaev. And, it was fairly competitive in that matchup. The one interesting thing, though, obviously, is that Chimaev 10-8'd Usman in the first round, dominating Usman just like he does to everyone else, and then starts to gas. I think there was rumors that he broke his arm or shoulder or some bullshit in that fight as well, on the Khamzat Chimaev side. So Chimaev starts to gas, and that's really where Usman kind of does his best work in that fight. Now coming in against a Joaquin Buckley, who's a man on a mission, on an absolute tear right now. Coming off that finish to Colby Covington, where he was looking real dominant against Colby Covington. And, Usman off the layoff, coming in at 38 years old. Buckley 31, just an absolute specimen of a human coming into this fight. I just think that even if Usman's coming in with all the technique possible as a 38-year-old, he's just going to get out-muscled, out-dogged, just out-athleticized by Joaquin Buckley this weekend. So give me Joaquin Buckley here. I think he can do it in whichever way possible. I think he does find a knockout against Kamaru Usman this week. We know Joaquin Buckley packs a punch. We know he's not going to give a shit about what's coming his way, especially against Kamaru Usman here. I think if Usman tries to wrestle, even if he is the better wrestler in this matchup, I think Buckley's just going to out-muscle him and, break out of positions and just control him however the fuck he wants. So give me Joaquin Buckley here. I think it's some ground and pound type of finish, and we're going to see him in some real title talk soon for the welterweight division. Alright guys, that does it for all the picks and predictions for UFC Atlanta. Excited for this weekend. We picked a ton of dogs this card. Like I said earlier in the video, we went 10 for 13 on fight picks at UFC 316. Our fight picks have been on fire as of late. If you do want to check out our actual bets for every single card, check out betkopicks.com. For $20 a month, you can see all our bets, all our unit sizes, the books we're placing them on. Join our Discord too, where we give premium members an alert when we do place a bet, so you can catch the bets we take at the same odds we get them at. Something interesting to note for this week, for example, is like a Ricky Simon who opened at minus 265. We dropped that in our Discord fairly quick, and he ballooned up to a minus 500. So real good EV, especially on some bets. So check out betkopicks.com. Join up on our Discord. The Discord is free, but obviously to see our bets, you got to sign up on the website. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys next week.